Good afternoon. My name is Dyke Henderson, and I am the host of the podcast Life Along the Merrimack. We get together Tuesdays at 2 o'clock, and we talk about the history and health of the Merrimack River. But we also go into other topics, I must say. Today, my guest is Jack Santos. Jack, thank you for being here.
My pleasure, Dyke.
Jack has numerous interesting roles in Newburyport, and which is good because I'll have plenty to ask him. He is on the board of the Merrimack, the Maritime Museum here in Newburyport, the Custom House Maritime Museum. And he also is the originator of a program that goes on in the era around Yankee Homecoming, which is called If This House Could Talk. And I've been on it. It's a situation. Well, Jack, why don't you talk about it? It occurred again, this Yankee Homecoming. It recognizes old houses and what they've been through and some of the history. What is the program, Jack, If This House Could Talk?
Oh, yeah. It didn't originate here. It started in Cambridgeport, Massachusetts, but we stole the idea. And I think it's safe to say we're probably the most successful, although there have been a couple places, Florida, I think a couple other places in Massachusetts have also taken the idea. We basically encourage people to put signs up on their house that tell an interesting story about the house. Mostly they tend to be historic. Sometimes they're not, they're more current, and they tend to be more, the signs are more than just the usual plaques that you get that says when a house was built and maybe who lived there. And it goes into a little bit more detail. And we do it during Yankee Homecoming. We've done it. This was the 6th year. And it's been great. It's a COVID friendly event, right?
Yes, it is.
You walk around outside. You don't have to be near anybody. You read the signs. You move on, and everybody just loves the house signs that get put up here in Newburyport. We have so much great history.
What would an example of an interesting house be? Something like a ship captain Stephen Bray lived here in the 19th century, then sold, or maybe you could.
Oh, yeah.
A couple different signs that you've seen that bring life to the house.
What makes this event so successful is how people have embraced it, and they go out and research their homes or research the people that live in them. And every year, this it being our 6th year, you would think it would be kind of repetitive, but no, there's new signs every year. And I'm going to kind of highlight a couple of new ones that came up this year that were my favorites. And then there's the old favorites too. Yeah, and you're right, Dyke. It's ship captains. I had a Revolutionary War veteran in my house. I like to highlight him every so often. And we had an added twist, which we'll get to this year, where Glee Woodworth, who was my partner in crime, or one of many partners, there's about 4 or 5 of us that helped pull this off. Put together a treasure hunt that was centered around some of
that must have been fun.
Oh yeah, no, it was great. But I'll pick a couple of homes. One of them was unusual because it is the first and only brick Italianate home in the city. Beautiful home, the Goodwin Baird House over on 70 Middle Street, near just a street above the Tannery here in the South End. Yep. And it was just an excellent poster that the homeowners put up about the style of the house and about Eben Goodwin, who was a shopkeeper, a sailmaker who lived there. Just fascinating. And that's one that reflected a lot of research into the home and a little bit more about the style and architecture of the home. The other one that I'll point out was also a new one this year over on 3 Orange Street, also in the South End. It was about the house at 3 Orange Street and the people that lived in there, and the fact that it was kind of a Greek revival home, and that some of the original features, the pillars out in front, the porch, still exist. It's been converted into condos, but unlike what happens a lot today, the builder at that time tried to keep significant features like the plaster walls, like the grand staircase. Those are all kind of built into how they put the condos in. And, a lot of builders don't do that today. They just tear it all out, which is a shame. In that house, I'll kind of on a highlight. The reason it was really one of my favorites. The owner of one of the condos also put together a story about 1946 and a newspaper article where the person living in that house would hang their laundry out to dry on the clothesline, and someone was stealing it. So somebody was stealing all specifically the undergarments off the clothesline in 1946. It turns out it was a neighbor who lived right behind them, and he owned up to it and was arrested and had a suspended term of 30 days.
Wow.
Once it went to court.
Things we would have never known.
Exactly.
One thing in history that, Jack, that's interesting, it doesn't reflect on this necessarily, but in terms of Newburyport's history, in 1811, there was a tremendous fire. It's still called the Great Fire. And much of High Street was spared because some of, in my view, the great building era and the golden era of Newburyport was about 1790 to about 1811. There was no war and no fires. But the fire of 1811 was very damaging. Did it get down to the area that you're talking about, Middle Street and places like that?
Yeah, it did. It actually stopped just short of Middle at Fair Street. So that basically Fair Street was the eastern edge of the fire. It went from there to N Street and then down to the docks and a little bit north. Essex Street was touched by the fire. So yeah, no, it took out all those houses. And you actually, if you go down there now, you'll see there's a lot of parking lots. It's not as densely populated. It's also mostly commercial district, and due in no small part, to the fact that that was the hub of the fire. Although I will tell you about my recent research, I just had a talk at the library. It was basically the history of Newburyport and specific facets of Newburyport. That fire was originally discovered by a young 11-year-old. And that young 11-year-old who eventually became one of the most richest people on earth. He became a banker. He moved to London.
Was this the wheelwright?
No, it wasn't wheelwright. It was a good guess because I do spend a lot of time on the wheelwrights. No, oh gosh, and it's slipping me now that I brought it up, but it was George Peabody. And George Peabody was working in his brother's store at the foot of State Street. And throughout his life, he would claim that he was the one that sounded the alarm on the fire. Today, we know George Peabody's bank as Chase Manhattan.
Well, that does tie it up together, I've got to say.
Yeah.
About a decade after that, in about 1820, talking about young men, a young fellow here in Newburyport was accused of starting a fire in one of the barns. Now, nobody was killed. I think a few animals were lost, but this 16-year-old was tried for arson, tried as an adult, and he was hung. And this actually is a national story because at the time he was one of the youngest individuals to be hung at the age of 16. And Newburyport is in many textbooks because after that, people started saying, look, this is a little too early to hang somebody. It could have been an accident. Are you familiar with that story, Jack? Because very sad, very grim tale.
Yeah, I'm not that familiar with it. I have heard of it, but yeah, it is. I've heard that it really drove some of the child punishment laws, or kind of alleviated some of that. But
it did, and as well as some people think, well, the community, some members of the community were so skittish and so scared about fires that when this fire, which wasn't nearly as grim as the one in 1811. There was extra impetus to take action.
Yep.
Another housing area that I like is what's now, it used to be a great house and now it's a library, the Tracy Mansion. Isn't that an interesting story about how one of our great entrepreneurs ended up in that house, and now it's our wonderful library.
Yeah, it's a fantastic library. In fact, if I did mention that George Peabody, that young kid who says he discovered the fire, he was one of the biggest donors for that library when they converted the mansion into the library. But it's a beautiful building. Everybody who lives in town has been in the library and just marvels at the architecture and then the history behind it. The library puts up a sign every year for If This House Could Talk. And they just had a celebration about the expansion that was built in probably 1991, 20 years, 30 years ago.
Yeah, I thought, and you might agree, I thought that was a great civic event when, the YMCA burned in about 1989. There was a death and it was a very tragic event. But, a lot of people got together and they decided to build a new structure right next to the library. And I think that's one of the great success stories in building that I know about, that a great effort was put forward. And now we have really a wonderful library.
And the library has been a huge supporter for If This House Could Talk, mainly because a lot of people go to the library's archival center that Sharon Spieldenner is the chief archivist of, and do their research down in the library. So between the library's archival center and the Preservation Trust, which is the sponsor of If This House Could Talk, we've got some really great support, within the community. One thing you may not know, like about that property, you mentioned there's the library. There's the old part of the library, which was the Tracy Mansion during the Revolutionary War. There's a new part of the library that was built on where the YMCA was, that burnt down in the late 1980s. But before the YMCA, there was a house in that spot. And that house, when they built the YMCA, was moved. It's now behind the Dalton Club on Garden Street. So if you walk on Garden Street and look at the house behind it, that's the house that used to be where the new wing of the library is today.
Wow. Well, talking about houses, and my name is Dyke Henderson. This is the podcast Life Along the Merrimack, 96.3 Joppa Radio and local cable channel 9. I'm talking with Jack Santos, who is well known, for If This House Could Talk. Now, Jack, if someone asked you, as I am now, what are a couple of your favorite houses in town? What would you say now there's all sorts of variables here, I get that, but do you have a couple that you like to drive past and look at and just wonder about and say, this is a great looking place?
Well, there's I'm not going to get the address right on a High Street, but there's a house on the corner of Tremont Street and High Street. It's a green mansard, and that's probably one of the best and most premier houses in the city. They do a great job. The owners, every year they have a model that they put up in front. It's like a scale model of the house, and usually a story of maybe somebody who was hurt in front of it by when they were riding their bike or something along those lines. So hats off to them on a fantastic house. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention my house. I rotate 3 or 4 signs over on Spring Street, and I always loved talking about Abraham Wheelwright, who was the first owner of the house. But what's really intriguing to me was the person who moved in after Wheelwright in 1860, lived here until 1900. When he passed away in 1900, the house went to somebody that was not related, not one of his 2 daughters. And for the life of me, when I was doing the research, I couldn't figure out why she got the house in his will, except to eventually find out she was his housekeeper.
Oh, good. A very intriguing house also, I believe it's 98 High Street. That's where the museum is, the It used to be called the HIS, but now it's the Historic Museum of Old Newbury. But that used to be Caleb Cushing's house, I believe, at one time. Caleb Cushing, for those listening, he lived from about 1800 to 1878. He is among the most accomplished Newburyport people ever. He was a congressman. He was Attorney General of the United States. He was Ambassador to Russia. I mean, that's quite a house in itself, isn't it?
Wow. Yeah, he actually may have been there as a child. I was once called on that because I thought he lived there much longer. I think he was there as a child. The house that he lived most of his life on was further up towards Newbury on High Street on the higher side on the was it that the west side or on the south side of High Street. Yeah, but that was definitely the Cushing family. John Newmarch Cushing was one of the original owners of that. And there's a lot of history. Cushing, of course, a little bit of a third rail for Newburyport, especially recently, given all the Black Lives Matter things, because he was kind of an apologist for Southern slavery and tried to find a reasonable compromise that wouldn't result in the Civil War. And good friends with Jefferson Davis.
Yeah, well, that's true. But, one of my concerns about that is he was quoted as saying a little later, because he was a presidential hopeful, he did not move forward for the reason you said. But he later in life said, I was concerned there'd be a civil war. Yep. I was concerned a great many people would die and much of the nation would be ruined. And, as I look back on it now, and no one could read the future then, that seems like a reasonable concern at the time.
Right. Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. There was a lot at play in those years. And Caleb Cushing, along with Franklin Pierce, I think he was Franklin Pierce's Secretary of State.
Yes.
Yeah. And then, they were really trying to avoid a calamity, which we, in the end, couldn't avoid.
Right. And there, are other wonderful places in town. But one, I noticed, Jack, on High Street, the corner of High and State, I believe, for years, decades, I should say, there's been a gas station there. It's been abandoned for now a decade anyway. But I saw a sign there the other day. Can the city leaders please take down this ugly, empty gas station? And I assume that the supposition is maybe we can put another beautiful house here. Have you seen that sign, Jack? That seems like ground roots activism.
I did. And it's been a big topic of discussion on Facebook. For those of you interested in Newburyport history, there's a Facebook group called Newburyport History Buffs. And that sign caused quite a stir. It was in the Newburyport Daily News this week. But yeah, the gas station has been an eyesore. Surprisingly, the house that was on that lot, there were two houses that were on that lot when they first built the gas station, and one of them has been lost to history. The other is moved to another part of the city, so it still exists. And it was a Bossy Gillis house. Yeah. So,
well, in the old days, they used to move houses quite a bit. A friend of mine, Dick Canepa, who lives in town, his mother remembers their house was moved, but I think on Middle Street. No, not Middle Street. Maybe Summer Street. But at any rate, this must have been a very complex thing because they were moving with horses. This isn't back up the old Volpone tractor trailer. This is get the horses, get the wood. I mean, to raise it up and take it down the street on horses, with horses leading the whole weight-bearing chore, that must have been difficult, Jack.
Yeah, people still move houses, but it was a lot easier back then because, there was no electricity, no plumbing. So houses were pretty self-contained. Put it up on a lift and move it on. But the Canepa house in particular, yes, you're absolutely right. Like, it was on Winter Street. And believe it or not, it moved. They moved that house because of the building of the Route 1 bypass in the 1930s. And they moved it to Merrimack Street. Today, it was torn down only recently in the last, 6-7 years. And it's now the site of the Newburyport parking garage.
It is. And, his mother, this must be, I won't go into its whole family history, I'm not totally clear of it, but she remembers one of the other great fires. I think it was in 1934 when a lot of the downtown, the wooden parts burnt up. And so she was alive to tell Dick Canepa that this has happened. So, we have some, remnants of history still passed along in the verbal sense.
Well, there's more than remnants. I mean, we're living in history. It annoys me to no end when somebody is either rehabilitating a house or digging a hole and they're saying, nothing to worry about. There's no history here. And I go, there's a history everywhere. You can't avoid it. And it's right around. I'll give you an example. You mentioned a $1 million fire, which that fire on Water Street that you just referred to. And I was up in the Congregational Church steeple looking at their clock and helping there. And I was surprised that most clocks from that era, the actual clockworks were painted green. This one was black. And I said to the clock master there, the person who takes care of the clock, I said, wow, this is unusual. This one's black. Most of the other ones I've seen are green. What do you think that's all about? Did somebody take a can of spray paint and paint it black? And then he says, yeah, I don't know. So he rubs his finger on the clock and up comes his finger's black. It's not paint. It was soot from the $1 million fire. The fire, all the smoke had gone into the steeple and it coated that clock black. It still exists today as a soot covered black clock.
Well, as you mentioned, some of the churches here are very old and, they have their own histories. And I've been through several of them, as I think you have been. It's really amazing to go back and really to the 17th century, some of them. And the Unitarian Church downtown, that survived a number of elements. It's funny, the Episcopal Church on High Street looks quite old, but that actually burnt down in about 1926, but it was rebuilt. It looks old. They did a beautiful job with rebuilding. That's coming up on a century. So as you say, there's a lot of history in the houses that we're attached to.
Yeah, I'll make a pitch and just try to. I'm going to go public. Somebody's going to be mad at me, but that's okay. The Unitarian Church, which is built in 1801 on Pleasant Street, it was originally in Market Square. They have in their possession one of the original clocks from 1735 that was in the Market Square building. It's not mounted in the Pleasant Street building. It's also a clock that Ben Franklin inspected because it was struck by lightning, and it led to Ben Franklin's his work on lightning. And
I didn't know that. I knew George Washington had visited town. I didn't know Franklin had been here.
Oh, but yeah, many times he had family here. But so that clock still existed, and I've been trying to get them. I have to talk to the pastor there to see if they can rebuild. They have all the parts. They can rebuild that clock and put it on display. It is quite a historical piece for our town.
Well, one of the benefits it did, getting back to the 1811 fire, one of the benefits was, the town was distraught. It was ruined. And so when they went to Beacon Hill to see if they could get state help, the state legislators said, yes, we will help you, but you have to rebuild in brick, not in wood. And so, when I walk downtown and see so many of the brick buildings, some of them were built around 1811 to 1815. I do remember that they said, look, we're not doing wood. You're not doing wood again. You've got to do brick. But we're better for it, Jack. I mean, the downtown has been recognized nationally as just a wonderful piece of history.
Not only does it draw tourists, but it saved our butts in the Abraham Bagels fire just a few years ago.
Oh, yes.
Had that building not been built the way it was after the 1811 fire, it would have been a lot more serious of a fire than it was.
Yeah, I do remember that. I used to work for the Daily News, the newspaper, which is right across the parking lot from Abraham's Bagels. And I think, we were fortunate that was not a more serious conflagration.
Yep.
Well, talking about buildings, Jack, you're involved with the Maritime Museum. We just have a few minutes to go, but you have a few things coming up at the Maritime Museum, which, if I'm correct, was built in 1835 and is one of our more famous buildings. But talk a little about what might be coming up at the Maritime Museum.
Well, it's been last 18 months has been a challenge for everybody. It's been a particular challenge for museums and nonprofits in terms of fundraising. We've decided, every year we usually have a ship come in, or every other year. We haven't been able to do that, but we still want to have a big citywide party. We're calling it Maritime Days. It's going to be the weekend of September 10th through 12th. It will basically involve shanty singing on Friday night, September 10th, where we'll have the Portermen sing, a trivia contest with prizes, as well as a voting of Newburyport's best pizza. So go to our website, customhousemaritimemuseum.org, and look up under the About menu and events, and you'll see all there is about that. Friday night evening. Saturday night, we're going to have a pirate party with the Baja Brothers Band, and to dance the night away. Everybody dresses up as a pirate. And then Sunday, we're still planning it, is a seat at table event where we'll have local restaurants take our fruits of the sea and present them on the lawn at the Custom House for
That's a tremendous success. I remember, when you've had it a few years back. I mean, I think every seat was sold out. The enthusiasm for the local food and fish was terrific. And that's a place where you can talk about old stories. I mean, the fishing industry in this community has a lot of tales to tell, but that sounds exciting, Jack.
Yeah, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention our premier event that weekend is Maritime's History Mystery Chase. It's going to be a treasure hunt with prizes, and everybody will get to kick it off with a breakfast. That's on Saturday, September 11th. A really fun, interactive thing. It seems like these treasure hunt types of events have taken off recently, and we're going to have one that's maritime related, and we'll take families and groups all around town to discover new things.
Well, that sounds good. And we just have a few minutes. This is Life Along the Merrimack, 96.3, Joppa Radio, local cable channel 9. I'm talking with Jack Santos. And Jack, could you just give the website of your organization again? So if people are interested in tickets or people want to learn more about the Maritime Museum, they can look it up easily.
Absolutely. It's customhousemaritimemuseum.org. And you go to the About menu under events, and everything will be described there, including our upcoming First Fridays that happen every month, where there's a lecture of interest that discusses Newburyport maritime history. But the whole Maritime Days weekend will be there.
So second weekend in September, and that's usually a good month for us. And I would mention it's so pretty to be in the back lawn of the Maritime Museum. I was there last Friday, I spoke, and Jack was my tech guy, if you will. Thank you very much again, Jack, for helping out with the slides. And we talked about the Merrimack River, which I've just written a book about. We talked about Plum Island, which my next book is about. But, I wanted to get you here, Jack, so you could talk about if this house could talk, because that is really an interesting event. And I assume you'll be doing it next year.
I hope so. We've got a great group of people, Barb Bosch Bailey and Bob Watts and Chris Edmonds and Mary. Now I forget. Mary Baker is always helps out every year with it, and Glee Woodworth. So we've got a kind of a core group that pulls it off, and we're kind of an autopilot. Everybody knows the drill. I used to have to explain it at length, and now people kind of get it. And so I hope it happens again next year at Yankee Homecoming.
Okay. Well, that's it for me. I'm Dyke Henderson, the host of this podcast. We were talking with Jack Santos of the Maritime Museum, who also has spearheaded the If This Good House Could Talk. Jack, thank you very much for being here, and I hope to see you again soon.
Thanks, Dyke. Appreciate it.
Okay. That's it for today. We'll be back next week. Goodbye.